So everybody, I'm Marcia Nedland. I am one of the organizers for the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. And today's webinar that we're hosting is called New Tools to Advance Equitable Homeownership in Middle Neighborhoods. And by new tools, of course, we're talking about we're talking about SPCPs. I started with an R in my head, special purpose credit programs. And some of you may be at least a little familiar with them, but I think you're going to learn a lot more about them today. And I myself was surprised at how widespread these programs are right now. So we're going to learn a lot from especially from Shanti, about how the uptake's been, who's doing what the full range of financial products are, and all of that. It's going to be very interesting. So we want to start, though, with a poll about what sector you're coming from. So if everyone could take a moment to fill that out. It's very interesting to us to, to sort of see who we're serving with our webinars. Government and nonprofit are usually the bulk of our audience, but we usually also have, I think somebody registered for this event from the Comptroller of the Currency and, intermediaries, regulatory agencies, and that sort of thing. So, okay, I think we get a sense of that. We have a lot. We're more close to half and half on nonprofit and government than we usually are. So it's very interesting. Let's see if I can stop sharing this. Okay, so just a little bit about the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative before we turn it over to our panelists today. We are a national initiative that's basically focused on mobilizing attention on middle neighborhoods because they are disappearing either through decline or gentrification, and they don't get a lot of attention because they are not the most distressed neighborhoods in communities. So they don't get a lot of attention from policy or philanthropy. We have a community of practice, which we always love to have everyone join. It includes practitioners, policy makers, and researchers. We have a research component that is mostly coordinated by NCST, who's our sort of co-sponsor with NeighborWorks America. We do policy analysis and advocacy, and also some communication strategies to advance awareness. So that's the Middle Neighborhoods Initiative. I think we have something coming up about middle neighborhoods in general. So just for those of you who aren't already familiar with our spiel on this, middle neighborhoods don't have hard and fast metrics about what is and isn't. But if you think in your community about the neighborhoods that are neither the most distressed nor are they the healthiest, then that's probably a middle neighborhood. They tend to have been built mostly with single family homes, assuming that was, generally the style in that city. And they were built for families with children, which is one of their vulnerabilities, is that section of the demographic. That demographic starts to decline in this country. They tend to be still well more than 50% owner occupied, although eroding over time. The housing stock is aging. It's in generally acceptable condition. It probably doesn't have a lot of code violations, but it often lacks features and updates to compete well for today's home buyers, unless you're in a super hot market. And one of the most interesting things about middle neighborhoods to me is that they tend to be more racially, ethnically, and economically diverse than either their lower income or higher income counterparts. So they kind of are those mixed income neighborhoods that we all really value when we're in the community development arena. One thing I wanted to let you know about is that at our website, you can access a mapping tool that gets worked on all the time. And basically it allows you to take a first cut at looking in your metropolitan area where your middle neighborhoods might be, only using the screen of median income. And so on the left side of your screen, there'll be a number of different variations on that screening tool that you can use to identify census tracts that meet different ranges of median income and with different geographies. And that can be a great starting place to have a conversation about where the middle neighborhoods are in your community and to start to kind of track over time what's happening with them, whether they're on a good path, the path that you hope they'd be on or not. And you can start to develop interventions that way. So today we have two fantastic panelists who I think have presented together before. Certainly they've worked together before. Shanti Abanin is the Vice President of Housing and Community Development at the National Fair Housing Alliance. And some of you will know that Shanti used to be at NeighborWorks America, where she ran all of their shared equity programs. And she's just doing amazing things at the National Fair Housing Alliance. And we're so happy to have her back in sort of the family again for today and to hear what she has to say. She's been especially focused on, I think, this topic of SPCP, so she knows a lot about it. And then Julie Curtin is Director of Home Ownership at Champlain Housing Trust in Burlington, and they were one of the early adopters of SPCPs among nonprofit lending organizations. And so they've been running an SPCP for a while now. And Julie just has a really interesting way of describing how they came to the decision to do that, what they understood about their market and gaps in home ownership and wealth that were happening in their market, and then crafting the tool that they use to try and start to address that. So those are our panelists, and the way we usually run this is that we have the stuff that I'm doing now. Shanti will focus on national trends and sort of set the table for us with a national overview of what's going on. Then we'll switch to Julie, who will talk about her local example, and then we'll have a lot of time for Q&A afterward. So you can put any questions that you have into the Q&A button in your, your little menu of options there, or you can put it in the chat if that's easier for you. We'll keep an eye on that, and our panelists may answer some of those questions by just texting them, and then whatever's left we'll address at the end. Okay. So now we're going to turn it over to Shanti, our national expert on SPCPs, and she's really going to lay it out for us about where SPCPs came from, when they came from, and why there's such a lot of work being done right now to implement them. So thanks, Shanti, for coming. Take it away.
Thanks so much. Sorry, I just froze up for a second there. Okay, thank you so much. So as Marcia mentioned, I'm the VP of Housing and Community Development at the National Fair Housing Alliance. The National Fair Housing Alliance, just to give you a little background before we dig into SPCPs, is a national civil rights organization, and we're the only national organization dedicated entirely to ending housing discrimination and creating equitable opportunities in housing for everyone. And so we do this in a number of different ways. We mainly do a lot through our services to 200 nonprofit fair housing organizations across the country who are our members, and local civil rights agencies and the like. We also do a lot around educating the public on their housing rights, civil rights, as related to things, all things housing related. We do a lot in the public policy and advocacy space, both at the national and some local levels. And we do a lot of emerging work right now on AI and how it can be used responsibly, AI and algorithmic bias, and how it can be used responsibly to overcome some of the biases in the housing market. So lots of stuff going on, including enforcing the Fair Housing Act. And then my division is the Housing and Community Development team. And so we do a lot to partner with communities to reinvest settlement funds from fair housing settlements into communities that have been destabilized by housing discrimination. And through that work, and in addition to that work, we also have a signature initiative called the Keys Unlock Dreams Initiative, which is our work to close the racial wealth and homeownership gaps. And so that really gets me to the focus on special purpose credit programs and the topic that we're talking about today. So before we dig in, I did want to just talk briefly about why we need to have tools like special purpose credit programs that offer a race-conscious approach or race-conscious remedy in our housing market and in our communities. So we all know that because of decades of discrimination in the housing field by our government, by industry players, homeownership and access to credit has really been locked out of the hands of people of color throughout our history. And that continues on today through acts of discrimination that are still very widespread. But today we have a 29-point homeownership gap between white and Black individuals nationally. And we have huge disparities between Latino and white and Black and white families when it comes to wealth as well. So here you can see on the left, this is the trends in terms of wealth. And this is recent data from the Brookings Metro that just shows that those disparities have been ongoing for the last few decades and are really extremely growing. So even though homeownership has grown overall for all races, but also for Black and Latino people, we're actually seeing bigger divides between white and Black homeownership, for example. So, and wealth, particularly. And so the second graph here is from Prosperity Now. And this graph is one that always kind of gives me chills, because what you're seeing here is that if we continue on the path that we're going on, it'll take us 81 years to close the gap between white and Latino wealth. And it would take over 200 years for us to close the gap between Black and white wealth. So looking at these two together, you can see that what we're doing is not really working in terms of addressing this racial wealth gap that has been created intentionally through discrimination in the housing space. So essentially we need to do something differently, and we need to be more targeted with our interventions. Okay, so the way we got here was through targeted discrimination, right? And so the way we're going to get out is through addressing that discrimination, remedying that past, and that really requires a tailored approach that looks at where those gaps are and aims to specifically address those gaps, whether they're racial gaps or gaps across other protected class features. So that's where special purpose credit programs come in. And special purpose credit programs can be a really useful tool. I'll be talking a lot about housing interventions because that's the focus of the National Fair Housing Alliance, but really this can be applied to any type of work that extends credit. So it can be in the small business arena, for example. It can be used in different types of credit transactions. So not just mortgages, but also home equity loans, refinances, all sorts of different things that extend credit. So I just wanted to make that clear. So what are special purpose credit programs? SPCPs, which is the easier way to say it, although not that much easier, are tailored ways to meet the specific needs or benefit and an economically disadvantaged group of people. So that can include people who are part of what we call protected class under the Fair Housing Act. So people of a specific race, national origin, or gender identity. And special purpose credit programs are explicitly permitted by statute to increase access to the credit market by persons previously foreclosed from it. So that's the language that is in the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, Regulation B. And it specifically says that they can be employed by for-profit lenders, nonprofits, and authorized by law, essentially through government agencies. And so for for-profit lenders, this means that they can develop programs for groups that, under that lender's customary standards of creditworthiness, probably wouldn't receive the credit that they're offering, or that would receive it under less favorable terms than are ordinarily available to other applicants that are applying for a similar type of credit or a similar amount of credit. So it looks at that gap between who they're not serving and attempts to remediate that gap by designing a special intervention, whether it's a lower interest rate, a down payment assistance program. It can be a number of different things that are extended in the lending space, different underwriting requirements, whatever it may be. So I do want to emphasize that special purpose credit programs are not a new concept. They were made available again in the 1970s, but they've gained momentum recently and are really being used more widely after guidance around 2020 that came out from a number of federal agencies that specifically encouraged their use and noted that they do not violate the Fair Housing Act or other civil rights laws. And those are from agencies here. You can see on the right, CFPB, HUD. We've got interagency statements from DOJ, FAFA, FDIC, NCUA. So a lot of material here that really encourages the use of special purpose credit programs that has been put out recently. And this particular screenshot is from our special purpose credit program toolkit, which I'll share with you, show more about with you. And so I do want to note that special purpose credit programs can be place-based or they can be specific to the characteristics of the borrower. So that means that some are designed to say, this particular loan product or program is available to people from a majority non-white census tract, as opposed to saying that, the borrower must specifically be Black or Latino, for example. So they can be designed one of two ways. There's plenty of examples of both, but we do really encourage, because of that last slide I showed you that it really be focused on the race of the borrower if you're attempting to really look at racial equity here. So again, I mentioned our special purpose credit program toolkit. This we created alongside the Mortgage Bankers Association and with the assistance of the Homeownership Council of America. It can be found at spcptoolkit.com. I'll drop that in the chat after I'm done so you all can take a look at it. But this is really to encourage facilitate the use of special purpose credit programs and also make sure that folks who are starting these programs are doing it following the requirements that are in the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and following best practices. And so this is a kind of the overview of what's in the toolkit. This is like the menu. So you can see it goes over a lot of the basics that we're talking about now. It has that regulatory guidance. It also includes some market examples, and it kind of gives you a step-by-step of how to build an SPCP, which I'll walk through quickly. Some data examples, and I did want to just mention that we have 2 new features in the toolkit so if you've looked at this in the past, these are more recent. We've added best practices for nonprofit organizations. So most of the content here is tailored towards for-profit lenders, but that also gives some information for nonprofits in particular. We also recently added our SPCP data toolkit in partnership with the Urban Institute. And that is a toolkit that provides the data that's necessary in the top 50 metro areas to really build the plan and put the data together to justify a special purpose credit program. So it's really cool. You can kind of go in and select your metro area and it'll populate data on homeownership gaps, data on credit access, things like that are needed to create a special purpose credit program. So definitely encourage you to look at that if you're interested. This is it from the toolkit, but it's a very high level overview of the requirements that are needed to set up a special purpose credit program. So, you start with determining the data or determining the needs. So I mentioned that special purpose credit programs are designed to remediate a gap that you see in the current access to credit, right? So you need to establish that gap to be able to justify your program. And so looking at the data, determining the need is an important step. Then you kind of design the credit intervention. So is it a DPA? Is it a down payment assistance grant or loan? Is it a lower interest rate? Is it something else? And then build a written plan for the special purpose credit program, right? So that plan actually contains your data, contains your justification, it describes your intervention. And then really importantly, it actually talks about your evaluation plan and how you're going to look at that need routinely over the course of the program to see if your program has in fact remedied the gap that you had seen and therefore no longer necessary, or if you need to tweak it or do things in different ways. So those are really important elements of a special purpose credit program. Legal review and internal approvals, we actually really recommend that people work with civil rights attorneys if they can to go over their special purpose credit program. We provide those services, but we also can connect folks to resources that would be helpful. And then here we have regulator review. Regulator review is not a requirement for special purpose credit programs, but it's considered a best practice just to check in with your state regulators, share the program, or other regulators. And then training and launch, and then this, training your partners, your, folks who are doing education outreach, things like that, and then a monitoring period. So that's very basic overview. I did want to just highlight that there are many special purpose credit programs out there. In our toolkit, we have a few that have agreed to let us share their information on the site. You can see all the major lenders have these programs that they've put into place, and all of these have kind of come up in the last 4 years or so. So they're really gaining a lot of momentum. They have coverage all over the country. There are dozens more in addition to what's listed here. And you can also see that, some again are not for the home buyer borrower, but are for like Black developers or, folks who are building affordable housing to grow their businesses. So again, it can be extended to different types of credit. And I did want to just talk briefly about an example. I know that we saw that, half of you are nonprofit, or about half of you are nonprofit, other half are government. And so I did want to just give an example of a government institution that has a special purpose credit program. So the Washington State Covenant Homeownership Act was passed in Washington in April 2023, so last year. And it's an act that was passed to address the state government's role in housing discrimination across the state, and its role in the gaps that we're seeing today across the state in homeownership. So Washington has, like many places in the nation, like I showed you the national data, they have a large gap between races and homeownership. And the bill specifically creates a source of funding and a special purpose credit program, or the directive to establish a special purpose credit program that provides down payment assistance to people who have been historically discriminated against in the housing and credit space. And so NAFA partnered with the Washington State's Housing Finance Agency to put together a study to, kind of serve as the plan for this SPCP across the state. And so we worked on that this time last year through March of 2024. And that study was released in March 2024. It establishes the long history of discrimination where the state played a direct or indirect role in housing discrimination. So it really covers that history in depth. It goes into things like the state's role in upholding racially restrictive covenants. That's the namesake of the bill, that excluded people, those, you can see the language here on the screen, excluded people of particular races from buying in neighborhoods. The state's role in redlining, the courts and what the courts did to uphold a lot of these practices. So it establishes all of that. It then establishes the extent to which those harms of those practices are still affecting people today. So those racial homeownership gaps, the wealth gaps, the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act data on who's getting loans right now, all of that sort of thing, homelessness, cost burden, all of that is covered to establish that there is indeed this issue that needs to be remediated in the state. It then goes through some data around, projections and data around why a race neutral approach is not going to be sufficient to close that gap. Sets out recommendations for a race conscious special purpose credit program, which will provide between 60 to 100 million in down payment assistance to home buyers in Washington. And it really aims to meet the need in high cost markets like the Seattle region, as well as other parts of the state. And finally, it has the evaluation plan that I talked about that kind of determines at what point the gap is kind of considered addressed, or the program is no longer needed. And so that is all in that study. The program is going to launch on July 1st. And we're excited about the impact of that kind of program. So these can be done by government agencies, nonprofits, and for-profit lenders. I just want to end by kind of noting that there are roles for people to play around SPCPs, whether you're a lender or not. You can, there's a lot of ways that, different entities can connect with these programs. So you can partner with a lending institution if you're not a lending institution to, encourage them to build a special purpose credit program based on the issues that you are seeing. You can do credit counseling and education in partnership with an SPCP. You can participate in, again, the program design. Universities can participate in research, or think tanks can participate in contributing to research for an SPCP. There's a lot around, getting people to know about the programs, access that resource. Some of these may not be widely advertised in your area, but there's a role for people to play that understand the special purpose credit program to identify people who could benefit. And also to, let people know, like, hey, this isn't a predatory thing. People see, say something targeting Black home buyers, and they're going to think back to, all of these decades of real trauma that has happened in terms of predatory lending. So playing a role to encourage the uptake of these programs, and then sharing data and experiences as the program's running for ongoing support. So a number of other roles as well, but I just wanted to highlight that there are important reasons to know about this work, whether or not you are kind of the main entity launching a special purpose credit program. And I will stop there and turn it over to
Shanti,
Julie.
before you take your slides down, I wonder if you could go back to the one where you sort of had the logos of different lenders that have SPCPs. Yeah. And if can you describe what their programs include, like whether they're down payment assistance, or they're a lower interest rate on a mortgage product, or it's a refi product, or that's a tall order.
Yeah, sure. So I know a few off the top of my head, but I do
Okay.
see that in the chat that our participants here are quick with Google and are sharing some of that as well. So that's great. So yeah, for example, Chase's program is a place-based program, and they have eligible census tracts across the country where they provide down payment assistance. I can't remember the amount, but it's a set down payment assistance or closing cost grant for buyers who are from those particular geographies. Rocket is doing something similar. Bank of America is doing something similar where they have a zero down payment loan, 0% down payment loan. And I want to note about these the ones that are focused on geographies rather than specific races, is that many of them, instead of making someone eligible who's buying in that census tract, they just say that if you live in that census tract, you're eligible, but you can buy anywhere, right? So they're not restricting people to a specific area. So they're not like, doing things that will particularly double down segregation, residential segregation, or anything like that. It's just making people available based on where they live now. I also met Wells Fargo's in the chat, but Wells Fargo has, I'm not sure if it's still ongoing, a SPCP that actually is for people who want to refinance. And this is to a lower mortgage rate. So this is particularly important because we know that the data shows that Black and Latino buyers in particular did not refinance at the same rates as white buyers in those times when we had like 2.5 and 3% interest rates, right? So they missed out on those savings that can sometimes be thousands of dollars a year. And so there can be special purpose credit programs that specifically allow for refinance or for HELOCs, or loans that'll help for repair in places where, for example, people are more vulnerable to disasters and things like that. So They can be a lot of different types of programs. You can also see some nonprofit examples here. And I had mentioned briefly the Black Developer Fund at LIF. That's really addressing the gaps of Black developers in the affordable housing space, or in housing developer space.
It does seem to me like I hear more programs that are down payment assistance than I do, say, first mortgages with really low interest rates.
Yeah,
And
that's
maybe
true.
there's a logic to that, that it has to do with getting people in an equity position faster. And so that makes sense. But also, I just know that interest rates right now are such a barrier to homeownership that I'm kind of surprised not to see more really low interest rate first mortgages. Do you happen to know why that is?
My guess is that a lot of these programs started after 2020, in the period where a lot of
Interest rates were already
were
low.
very low, and they
Yeah,
initiated those programs as part of their, ongoing work, but
good
specific
point.
work committed to racial equity right at that time. So there may be more of those types of SPCPs cropping up right now, but for
Okay,
the ones that we have documented, they're mostly from, a few years ago, where the
yeah,
interest rates were not as much of an issue.
good point. Really good point. Okay. Well, thanks, Shanti. And so now we get to hear about a very specific example of an organization that was kind of early on the ground. And what's especially interesting about the example that Julie's going to talk about is that, as you'll hear in a minute, most of the work Champlain Housing Trust, or a lot of their work, focuses on homeownership that is in a shared equity program to begin with, and which helps a lot with affordability and access. And then on top of that, now they've added an SPCP. So Julie, welcome, and thank you so much for being here, and go ahead and tell us about your SPCP at Champlain Housing Trust.
Thanks, Marcia. Thanks so much for having me. Once again, I'm Julie Curtin. I'm the Director of Homeownership at Champlain Housing Trust. Next slide. Just tell you briefly a little bit about who Champlain Housing Trust is, or CHT. We are a community land trust, and we are focused on the people of Northwest Vermont, where we're focused on strengthening communities through permanently affordable homes and related community assets. So that gets a little bit to that shared equity piece. The next slide will show you a little bit more about who we are. We and the dark green counties are the three where we're mostly focused, although our SPCP is actually statewide. We have a large multifamily rental portfolio, and we also have, this number continues to grow, but one of the largest portfolios of shared equity homes. So this is home ownership, and I'll be talking more about this today, along with a variety of other real estate, and specifically do have lending programs for buyers and homeowners, which was an important capacity piece to allow us to be able to create an SPCP. So next, I'd like to just give you a little bit of a history of Community Land Trust and CHT to sort of show why we were motivated to create a special purpose credit program. Community land trusts have been around in the United States since the 1960s, and they really were born out of the civil rights movement. In 1969, a group that included Congressman John Lewis and Charles and Shirley Sherrod, who were both civil rights activists, helped secure economic security for African American families through the creation of New Communities, Inc. New Communities was a community land trust based in Southwest Georgia, and it was really an initiative to find a way to help African Americans have land, and have land security, and land that they could work and prosper from, and also build their housing on. So this was the first community land trust in the country, and was the inspiration for Champlain Housing Trust. Fast forward to 2020, at that time, Champlain Housing Trust Board of Directors, like many organizations across the country, passed a resolution and thought deeply about how to respond to discrimination and violence against Black and Brown people, reaffirming CHT's commitment to fight racism and fight for the principle of racial justice in our work. That also led to, in the fall of 2021, we received a $3 million grant from one of our regional credit unions, New England Federal Credit Union, to put these values into action through what we call our Homeownership Equity Program. And our Homeownership Equity Program, or HEP, is really designed to increase the number of homeowners of color in our region. The next slide will show you the components of the Homeownership Equity Program, which is modeled after the Black Homeownership Collaborative, a national campaign to create 3 million new Black homeowners by 2030. With homeownership being one of the primary ways for building wealth in the country, addressing the racial homeownership gap is critical for addressing inequities in wealth based on race. In particular, in Vermont, if you are white, you are 3 times as likely to be a homeowner than if you are Black. So Vermont already has a relatively small population of color, but even within that population is a relatively small rate of homeownership. We have 6 components of our Homeownership Equity Program, and they're all listed here in this graphic. They all work together. I'm going to focus on the down payment assistance and production component because that's where our SPCP fits in. The other thing I'll add is that in 2023, we received a large philanthropic grant from philanthropist Mackenzie Scott, and our board took $1 million of that grant, allocated it to this program to take our SPCP statewide. So we've been doing that since April of this year. In the next slide, I'd like to tell you about specifically the terms of our SPCP. It is a down payment assistance program like we were talking about, and it is coupled with our shared equity program. People who received our down payment assistance received a $25,000 loan at 0% interest. It can be used for closing costs, which in our market range from $8,000 to $12,000. And if you live in the home for 3 years or more, there is no repayment obligation. So ultimately, it is forgiven. It has a declining balance over 3 years. The next slide shows the eligibility requirements for our SPCP. Number 1 is you have to purchase a shared equity home. From June 2022 to April 2024, it was only available for Champlain Housing Trust shared equity buyers. In Vermont, we have 8 or 9, depending on how you're counting, shared equity providers across the state. So now you can buy a shared equity home with any of them and get this down payment assistance. We have a maximum income of 120% of area median income for our borrowers. And because we are trying to grow homeowners, we do have a requirement that the borrower be a first-time home buyer, which we define as someone who has not owned a home in the last 3 years. And finally, this is a race directed program. So our SPCP does require in its eligibility that one of the applicants who will be on the prospective deed identifies as Black, Indigenous, or as a person of color. And finally, I'll just note that our program can be used with other down payment assistance products, which we do have in our market. Because our program is only available for shared equity, I did want to take a brief moment to describe what shared equity is for those of you who are not familiar with it. Essentially, through our shared equity program, it enables someone to buy a home without a down payment and with a reduced mortgage. We take state and federal funds to provide down payments of 20 to 30% of the home's market value. These funds are secured against the home and stay with the home again when the property is resold. We secure those funds either through a ground lease and a mortgage or a housing covenant if we have a condominium. At resale, in exchange for getting this financial benefit, the homeowner agrees to share a portion of the appreciation in value of the home with Champlain Housing Trust, which we reinvest in the home to keep it affordable for the next buyer. Specifically, the seller receives 25% of the appreciation in value, 75% remains with the home. The seller also receives 100% of the increase in value due to any capital improvements they've made to the home, as well as any equity that they have built through the principal reduction that they've made through their mortgage payments. Our shared equity homeowners truly are homeowners, and as many senses of the word, the concept as you can think. They maintain their homes. They are responsible for keeping up with their payments, insurance, and taxes, and the like. And we do also require that they be owner occupied. The few benefits of the program are listed in the next slide. When you look at this list, you can see they are many. There are benefits, and largely because they're making homeownership accessible to people who are otherwise priced out of the market. We've been doing this for 40 years. We have data that shows that people do build wealth. In fact, the average housing costs in our market for our shared equity buyers is $400 a month less than what they would be paying in rent. So that's our marker. We're trying to essentially be at a point where owning a shared equity home is more financially advantageous than renting. This allows people to save more money, as well as building equity over time. So we've found that over time, over 70% of our homeowners go on to buy homes in the open market. A number of the other benefits that you see listed here just are community benefits. It's a way to stabilize neighborhoods. It's a way to ensure that high-cost neighborhoods always have affordable homes for sale. It's also a good investment of public dollars, because a one-time subsidy investment can grow with the market and doesn't have to require another infusion of subsidy from public sources. We currently have, as I said earlier, 681 homes in our portfolio, but because these homes have been in our portfolio and have resold over time, we've helped over 1,322 households become homeowners through the program. On average, our homeowners build about $25,000 in equity, and many of them stay in their homes for longer than 4 years, and we also have about a quarter of our homeowners stay there for longer than 10 years. This allows folks to build wealth and put roots down in their community. So even with all these great benefits, I now want to talk a little bit more about the special purpose credit program. And the next slide, I'll touch on how we designed our SPCP. Right now, the state of Vermont is roughly 6%, let me say it different, about 94% white, about 6% people of color. Our shared equity portfolio, we have a greater percentage, over 8% of our owners are people of color, but we have a long way to go to bridge the homeownership gap in Vermont. And I'll show you some numbers on what that gap looks like in a moment. Our board and our staff really felt that we needed to have something more than just shared equity. And so we tried to think about, given we have a large database of all the transactions we've done in our portfolio over 40 years, and identified that one of the biggest barriers to households of color who want to buy a home with us is covering their closing costs. So that's why we sized our loans to be $25,000. It would cover the $12,000 of closing costs and give additional money to reduce that mortgage. The other thing that is nice about reducing a mortgage with shared equity, particularly for folks of color, is it means there's an equity boost right out the gate. So first, we assessed our data and decided there was a need for down payment assistance to get more people of color into homeownership. Next slide, I'll show you our homeownership rates in Vermont, which was the other research we did. We looked at county specific. Chittenden County is our primary county. It's our only urban county in the state. And we looked at state specific rates of homeownership. And all racial categories have lower rates of homeownership than white households. Sort of particularly striking is the rate of Black homeownership being only at 21%, in Vermont compared to 42% nationally. But because all racial groups in Vermont do have lower homeownership rates, we did design our SPCP to be available to all of these racial groups. We took this data and our analysis of the program and did write a plan that Shanti talked about, and talked about how we would evaluate the need for the program on an ongoing basis in that plan. Next slide, I'll show you a couple of one of these slides. These are some of our homeowners, including one. As a community land trust, we have homeowners on our board of directors. And so one of these slides includes one of our board members. And I bring up our board because our board had really deep and thoughtful conversations over multiple sessions about, do we target this only to serve specific racial groups, or do we use a geographic scope for who would be eligible? And in the end, our board felt very strongly that we needed to have a racially targeted program to really have an impact on those large gaps that you saw on the last slide. Once we made that decision, and sort of throughout the process, we did also talk with our civil rights attorney throughout, and got good legal advice. And we did also consult with our state agencies who uphold fair housing laws, as well as our lending regulators. We went so far as to send a letter to our Department of Financial Regulation, and we sought a no action letter, which we received, whereby the state said that they would not take action against our program for violating state discrimination laws, because our program is pursuant to federal law, and which controls in this space. In the next slide, you can see how people access our program. Largely, we run everything through shared equity. People apply online. And when you apply for a shared equity home, you do provide demographic information. If, based on the information we receive, you are eligible for the SPCP, we send you an eligibility form and start the underwriting process for the loan. It's important to note that the person who does this on our staff is a licensed lender, because we do need to comply with Vermont licensed lending laws. Next, I'd like to show you the results of our SPCP to date. It is ongoing, but you can see that we have had an impact. For 3 years prior to implementing the program, we were hovering a little over 18% in terms of the percentage of BIPOC buyers. And in the last couple of years, we've been closer to 1 out of 3 of our buyers being people of color. And we're serving a range of household size and a range of housing types. Next, I'll show you, and it's a lot of numbers on the slide, and we could spend a lot more time on it, but the bottom line is I felt it was important to address how folks can build wealth through this program, because homeownership, the gap in homeownership is so connected to the gap in wealth. And what you can see here is in the middle column, it shows how a household who buys a home using our SPCP, which we call the HEP-DPA, can reduce their monthly housing costs by borrowing less. When compared to renting, they're saving over $600 a month compared to buying a home on the open market, which requires much higher inputs in terms of a down payment and has a much larger mortgage. And then in the next slide, you'll see I take the example a little further to show you how after time, when the home is resold and the homeowner receives their share of appreciation, coupled with that savings that they were able to take advantage of because they were paying less in housing costs than either an open market home or rent, they were ultimately, our homeowners who are buying with HEP are able to come out ahead in a significant way. So to wrap up, and I'm sorry to run through so many numbers so quickly, I just wanted to acknowledge that we are, this is a learning process for us, and we certainly could not have done it alone. We're really grateful for our local credit union's support. We've also had fabulous support from our state agencies in the housing space. And I just will emphasize how helpful it is to have groups like the National Fair Housing Alliance to help with this sort of technical expertise. And really, I hope that the takeaway is that other groups can do this too, that you can comply with the regulations and develop a program that does increase homeownership in your market. And finally, I will say we are very grateful for our community partnerships with groups that serve different communities in our region. Particularly, we've had wonderful partnerships with refugee and immigrant groups who've allowed us to provide all of our homebuyer education and shared equity information in now over 6 different languages. And we're continuing to do that because outreach and connecting with people in the community where they're at is an essential component of having a successful SPCP. So with that, I hope that's been useful, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Julie. That is absolutely fascinating. And I love how well you've documented the changes, evaluated its impact on who you serve. That's really, really interesting. And also, I was really surprised at what a difference it makes in wealth building over the long term. What a difference it makes. It's huge. We have a couple of questions. I think the first one in the Q&A is probably one for Shanti. Is there any concern about SPCPs being challenged in light of recent Title IX rulings? And do you want to explain what that Title IX ruling was?
Sure. So this is referring to recent challenges to programs that have specifically made resources or, entry into their programs available based on, gender or race. And so, there's definitely a spotlight on programs that are specifically aimed towards addressing equity or the lack of equity in our society right now. And so, I don't want to underplay that. I don't want to downplay it in any way. But these, what's different about using an SPCP is that it actually has the explicit coverage of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. ECOA, expressly allows these tools to be used to benefit people who have, previously been locked out of access to credit. So it is different than some of the other programs. And so, it is absolutely important to, follow the steps that are required to make sure that your SPCP complies with everything in ECOA, to be cautious about that, to consult, the legal teams that you need to consult, legal folks that you need to consult. But no, I mean, the point is that, we have this tool and it is legally expressly allowed by statute. And, we need to proceed with caution, but still proceed ahead and use all the tools that we have at our fingertips if we can to, address the issues that we see in terms of racial wealth gaps.
Do you add anything to that, Julie?
No, I mean, I think Shanti covered it well. I do know, in Massachusetts, for example, the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston launched an SPCP very similar to ours, actually, but more money, broader reach, paused to consider the Supreme Court decision and relaunched again in the same form. So I think, that was interesting for us to watch as we're doing similar work in a smaller market, and was a great vote of confidence for moving forward with this tool.
Great example. The next question is about the data and determination of need. And the question is it necessary to determine a gap in the market or a gap specifically in an institution's own lending program?
I guess that one's probably for me too. So I guess I say this probably at least once a day, but I will say I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice. But now that I've said that, you know, it depends. I'd say it depends on the type of organization you are. So again, I mentioned that government entities, for-profit and nonprofit, have different requirements. And so, you know, depending the requirements for government agencies, for example, are subject to strict scrutiny. And so there are different kind of recommendations for those. But the best practice recommendation is to use the data from both, but depending on the entity you are, it's not an essential requirement. It strengthens, you know, I think if you read the CFPB guidance, for example, it strengthens your case to have that proprietary data in there. But certainly it is encouraged to use market data, HMDA data, homeownership data, as we've talked about. So I guess, you know, without the specifics, it's hard to really say, but there are scenarios where it definitely would not be necessary.
Mhm. Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure. By the way, we're going to close although we said it was going to be, let's see, I'm doing the math. I'm 3 hours behind the East Coast. So we start at 2, 3. I think we're going to end at 3, not 3:30. Because we only have 2 panels today. We normally run an hour and a half. Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston's program is called Lift Up Homeownership. I had one more question, which is to Julie, how do you promote this program? Is it all word of mouth? You know, it may be that you have already developed great channels as it is, but I'm really curious how you promote it.
Yeah, sure. We when we launched the program initially, and then when we expanded it statewide, we did get some great press coverage. So that was really nice. And also interesting to see the public's reaction to it. We have community partners, as I mentioned. And so really, I think our outreach approach has been to talk to community partners who are serving communities of color in our area. And so we've gone to community meetings, or we'll talk to leadership in different community groups and share about the program that way. And we just always direct people back to our website, which has great information about the program. And that truly has been, that's been enough for people to
That's
find
great.
us.
And what was the public's reaction to the news stories?
Overwhelmingly positive.
That's great.
People really, I think, understand that there are these huge inequities, and felt great that we were doing something about it. I mean, as you can imagine, there's a segment of folks who just didn't agree or didn't feel it was fair, but it wasn't necessarily, I don't think they're necessarily understanding the regulatory framework that we were operating in.
Sure. Well, I also want to really highlight again for everyone the SPCP toolkit. It is really well done. It's really an amazing resource, and you can poke around in there for, 5 minutes or an hour, depending on how much time you have, and you'll learn something every time. It's really a great tool. So I want to congratulate Shanti's organization on helping to create that. I think that kind of policy support has got to have had an impact on how well the uptake has been going on this program. So I really want to thank both of our panelists today. It's been really a great learning opportunity. As we close out, want to let you know that our July webinar is going to be about block makeovers as catalysts for change in middle neighborhoods. We don't have a date yet. We're sorting that out, but it's going to be very interesting range. I think we're going to probably have three or four presenters for this one who have very different but really successful examples of block makeovers. One of them even uses it as a way to raise money for the organization. And then our next engagement chat is July 17th. It's going to talk about volunteer coordination and management software for that. And DePetta manages that, so let her know if you're interested. Please email us if you have any, ideas for webinars that you'd like to see or case studies you'd like to see, news stories. If you're doing anything, let us know. One of our partners is Center for Community Progress, and they do a really great webinar series themselves called Cornerstone. We like to cross promote there. And finally, you'll see an evaluation form at the end of this when you log off. It has space for you to give us your ideas about future webinars, case studies, etc. Finally, when we do the follow-up email to you with the link to the recording of this and the slide deck, we will also include a link to best practice that Anne wrote up about Julie's program. So you'll have a lot of detail about that, and I think you'll find that really useful. Please follow us on LinkedIn if you are a LinkedIn user. It's just Middle Neighborhoods. We post a lot of our stuff, and we're really trying to build our presence there. So it would be great if you could help us out. Let's see, everyone's leaving. Okay, that's great. You will be put into our community of practice by virtue of being in this webinar. And I think you'll find that it's a great place for peer sharing. And if you want to be in our Google group, just let any of us know, and we'll put you in there, because that's a way for you to communicate directly with the other people who've chosen to do that, who are in our community of practice. So thanks again, everyone. And I hope you have a great what's left of the week. And I hope that we're all out there working hard to close the wealth gap and the homeownership gap in our communities. We have a long way to go, as Shanti pointed out. And so it's really all hands on deck kind of situation. So let's all go out there and do something about it. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.